Bryant, we could take some questions.
Yeah. Well, I'll start out by asking, let's just jump right into, we've heard that LMPD is not always completely cooperative when it comes to being open and willing to be inspected. So how will you deal with that? Tell us about that. Tell us what resistance you're feeling. You fixed it, right?
Well, we have made progress. I will say that. I was when I was in Albuquerque, the department was already under a consent decree. It had been under a consent decree for about a year when I was appointed. So they had already felt the pressures of cooperating with civilian oversight. In addition, the Civilian Oversight Agency was reconfigured when I took it over. And so there was already a level of cooperation that was established, and that level of cooperation was not established here. And so on a daily basis, we continue to struggle with the department's concept of oversight. They believe that they should be in control of everything, even to the point of today sending me an email that said that I should not be able to hold the community policing council's meetings without, meeting with the executive staff and getting their blessing. Well, we're oversight and we get to do what we want to do. We have a little saying in our office, we're not ordinary people, we IG. And so we have certain privileges by ordinance and by just the concept of oversight. The concept of oversight doesn't mean that I have to seek your permission to do certain things. It doesn't mean that we're not going to always protect the officer's procedural due process. We will always do that. We will protect all of the parties in the transaction, but there has to be a level of cooperation and collaboration, and what the department doesn't realize is that ultimately we will be an asset for them. So right now it's still very adversarial, but we'll work through that. We make progress. We've made better progress under the Greenberg administration than we experienced at the end of the Fisher administration. So we do have a memorandum of understanding in place for certain access to materials. And I can report just today that our investigators, for the first time, have direct access to all of the lapel videos that are recorded by the department. And we've just gotten that in the last couple of days.
I think that I always say, it took a minute for the board to get up to speed, it took a minute for the office to get up to speed, and so we're kind of building this as we go. The ordinance is our, of course, foundation, but it doesn't tell us how we're going to proceed. It establishes that relationship between the board, the inspector general, and the police department. And so you don't always know what you're going to encounter, and we did not, right? So once we were starting to receive complaints and the office was up and running, it was, okay, kind of what do we need next, and how are we going to proceed? And so I think with the transition between administrations, right, I don't want to put something out here and then it changes, and there was a lot of uncertainty in how to proceed procedurally for us to be able to do our oversight duties. And so I will say that it has gotten a lot quicker, right, once the administration changed and we're actually able to, lack of a better term, negotiate, right, how we're going to work out. And those things are things that you would put into an ordinance. An ordinance isn't for, how we're communicating with each other and timeframes for communication and when we're going to get those sorts of things. And so our memorandum of understanding does that. And because we didn't know necessarily from the board's perspective how we wanted to proceed, we were hesitant to really come out into the community and say, the Office of Inspector General is up and running, it's time for you to file complaints. We wanted to make sure that we were able to establish this relationship with them so that we actually could proceed with investigations and be able to have that foundation to provide responses. Now we feel, I'm glad to hear that we're now, the office can proceed, because not having that relationship and able to have inspectors look at potential evidence is huge. And so now what you'll start to see from the board, now that we have this movement, is we will be able to be more out in community. As you mentioned, our meetings are on the, what is that, the third, fourth Wednesday at 3 o'clock. And so the board's intention, now that we know this, is that we can move around into community to have our meetings, to make sure that those scheduled, because we are that liaison, as I mentioned before, and we feel more confident now in actually saying, and not in a disingenuous way, hey, come and let us know what's going on. Now we're actually in a position where we'll be able to kind of call the others.
I have a quick question. Now, this oversight committee was formed before the DOJ said they were going to do a consent decree. So we needed some kind of oversight long ago. But here we are with the new pending consent decree. How does the oversight committee and the Attorney General's office, the Inspector General's office, work with the new consent decree, the new guidelines, the new path for Louisville? How does that all play out?
Well, that is actually yet to be determined, because the terms of the consent decree have not yet been negotiated. The DOJ is in.
Will you be involved in that? I know that the mayor's office will be with the DOJ's office. Will you be, your office be
I will
involved?
not be involved in those direct negotiations with the administration and the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is in town this week again for community input, and once they've collected all of that community input, they're going to present what they believe is necessary to be in the consent decree to the city for their evaluation, and then the negotiations will begin for those terms. And what that consent decree will become is a federal court order. So it will be filed with the court, and it's going to have performance paragraphs associated with it. So one of the paragraphs may say you must establish an oversight entity. Well, Louisville has ahead, they've already done that. But there will be many more. And then they will agree on a monitor, and the monitor is the umpire, calls the balls and strikes. It is not the consultant of LMPD to tell LMPD how to do its work or how to write its policies. It will simply say yes or no. It works or it doesn't work, as far as I consider it. And then there will be objective measurement criteria. So you will have to reach a level of probably 90% in order to pass that paragraph, depending on how the monitor decides the monitor wants to grade. So we don't know. I would imagine that we at the Civilian Review and Accountability Board and the Office of Inspector General will enjoy a bit of leverage, and will have some defined access points to LMPD that they're not willing to give us at this point.
What's the monitor? Is that another paid position?
Yes, the monitor will be essentially a contracted person that is agreed upon by the Department of Justice and the administration, and will be approved by the court. So it will be somebody with experience in community-oriented policing. They'll have a team. So the monitor team in Albuquerque is 15. You have the head monitor, but then the monitor has subject matter experts for bias, for community-oriented policing principles, for community outreach, for use of force, for trauma, for mental illness. So the monitor will be a team of professionals to evaluate the progress of the department in accordance with the consent decree.
Thank you so much for being here. We are really interested in, can the consent decree make significant change? We've been told that many times there's like a lot of flurry around them, and then when the Department of Justice leaves, things kind of go back to the way they were. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that in terms of Albuquerque, because you oversaw that, and other cities that may have had success, because we've heard of cities that haven't had too much long-standing success.
Well, let's see. Wednesday, I believe, I met with one of the DOJ attorneys that is here and is also working the Albuquerque case. And Albuquerque entered their consent decree in November of 2014, and right now they are at 92% compliance, operational compliance. And operational compliance means that those changes have become ingrained in the culture of the department. So they're on their way to being out of the consent decree. And I'll be snarky. Part of the non-compliance is the board that I used to work for that I was having friction with because of mission creep and other things. But Albuquerque took the extraordinary step of hiring a team of consultants to come in and do police work for a while. So they hired, it's called the External Force Investigation Team. So they hired a team of professionals to come in and do every force investigation. So every use of force investigation was done by this team. And they had the force team detectives tag along with them to learn how to investigate force. So that project was a 2-year project, and it turned it around for Albuquerque, because much of the problem in Albuquerque was use of force. So they've used this external team model to make great strides. Other successes are New Jersey State Troopers for bias, and Pittsburgh for bias and force as well. So those are 3. Seattle is a success as well. They've just had some minor technical issues with their last collective bargaining agreement that threw them back out of compliance. So there are successes, but there will be times when the department will claim that they cannot police with the restrictions that the Department of Justice is going to put upon them. And you can't buy that. You can't listen to that argument, because, in other words, they're saying we can't police and we can't keep you safe within the bounds of the Constitution, and that's just wrong. So that will be coming.
I'd like to hear about what your organization is doing. I mean, I know the consent decree and all these things are important, but to date, your 2 organizations have both entertained complaints, I guess, from the community. Could you give us some examples of the kind of complaints that both of you have fielded to date?
So the process is that once a complaint has been filed, the Inspector General's office has to do a preliminary investigation. That is brought to the board, and that Inspector General will make a recommendation whether to proceed with a full investigation or not. From the board's perspective, those complaints have to fall within the 6 categories that we are allowed to have investigations over. And so really, initially, just for preliminary purposes, the board is looking for that. And then we would vote yes or no according to recommendations and information provided at that time after the preliminary investigation is done. So we have several, of course. Once the DOJ report came out, we have more. As I mentioned earlier, there was some issues trying to proceed with some of the investigations, and just with the cooperation from the police. And now that we have that, those earlier investigations are now able to proceed. while we were not receiving a bunch of complaints earlier, the board was going through, if you recall, the Fisher administration had a consultant come in, I think Hillary Hines, and a report was done, and the department was proceeding with recommendations from that report. The board has spent several months going through that report and looking at those recommendations that have come for that. The police department does have a dashboard as to where they are with those 100+ recommendations that came from that report. So we were following up with that, as well as, kind of making a list of questions and other things that we were going to follow up when this, when the DOJ report came through. So those are kind of on hold at the moment as we're going through. It would seem to me, and looking at both of those reports, that there is some overlap in some of the recommendations. The dashboard doesn't give a lot of detail, so a lot of the board's questions were what was really done. This is dream, but what does that mean? Does that make sense? So a lot of our questions were following up on that, and we'll see as we proceed with the consent decree negotiation what comes out on the other end, what questions we will have following that. So we spent some time doing that because part of what we can do is make recommendations to the police. So we were proceeding in that era, right? While we were still not able to get a lot of information from the police department to proceed with investigations. So at this moment, we are still kind of doing that. We, as I mentioned before, still feel comfortable now that we can address and go out into community, and we will plan to do more outreach in that sense. And now that the office is proceeding with investigations, when those come through, because we hadn't had a completed investigation come to the board yet, we'll be able to address those things.
But what I was asking is, what sort of complaints have you all received? But what sort of complaints to date have you all received from the?
Well, sorry, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
We've received a wide variety of complaints, from general discourteous, lack of courtesy or decorum, all the way to deaths at the hands of LMPD. So the 6 categories are death or serious injury by a police action, death or serious injury for someone who is in police custody, discrimination, sexual misconduct, abuse of authority, and pattern practice. So we have investigations that fit all 6 of those categories ongoing at this point in time. So I would anticipate within the next month or 2 we should be completing some of those, now that we've been able to get over the access hurdles that we were facing. So once those are done, our reports will go up on our website, and so you'll be able to review those.
Can you talk a little bit about how the contract negotiations with the FOP, how that impacts or doesn't impact you all, or do you all be a part of that or advocate for transparency?
Well, we're not a part of that negotiation either, as far as the FOP and the city. When you're an oversight agency, you're independent from but accountable to, and there are times when the city wants to represent you. So they want to represent you when they're negotiating with DOJ and the union, but there may be other times when they don't want to represent us. So we'll see how that goes. But we will. I don't see the contract hindering what we can do in our office, honestly. And I know that it would be nice for us to have the subpoena power as well that we don't have. But I don't think that that's going to be a huge hindrance either. It could be in some cases. I mean, some investigations, the subpoena power could make or break the ability to make a determination. But for the most part, we'll be able to adequately do our investigations without the subpoena power.
I'll just add that one of the hats I used to wear was over HR.
Put it in front of your mouth.
Okay, can y'all hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
And so, yes, their contract is very important, and of course, is the terms and conditions of their employment. But there also are statutes that are coming from Frankfurt that also have a lot of their rights and also dictate the terms and conditions of a police officer. So, if you're looking for what is allowed and what's not allowed and what you can ask and what you can't ask and what they can and what they can't do, it's not just their contract that is that source of information. There are statutes that also dictate that dictate what can be and what won't be in their contract as well. So I just want to point that out, that that's not the only source.
Mayor Greenberg ran for office saying that he would keep the contract negotiations open, and now he said they're not going to be open. And if you were here, we would ask him this question, but can you explain why that he's not having it open to the public?
No, I cannot.
No, sir, I don't know that.
I wouldn't want to be in a position to speak for Mayor Greenberg and the decisions that he makes.
That's kind of mystifying.
Yeah, I don't know what. I understand that his position is that it's something within a statute.
That's why I brought that up, because I know a lot of times everyone's like, why is this in there and why is that not in there? And I don't recall the actual citation to give to you, or I would, because we always refer to it as the police officer bill of rights. But that is a very overseen right. If it comes from the state, it's over what would come from the city. And so it really does provide a lot of parameters around what can and can't be done, and when things can and can't be done, that are overlaid and read into their contract already. And those things aren't negotiable. So I don't remember all of them. It is quite a bit. But that is the other source that really you can't, in my mind, separate the two.
So maybe he just didn't know. We'll just give him the benefit.
I have a question, if it won't be that difficult, I don't think. How is a complaint filed?
How is a complaint filed?
We have many ways for you to file a complaint. You can come in person to file a complaint. We are we're in the City Hall Annex, 609 West Jefferson, on the 3rd floor. Security will call you and we'll come on down. We have a complaint form online on the city's website, and that form comes directly to us. It does not go to LMPD, and they have no ability to see what is in that complaint. Also, I believe we have some flyers here. There's a QR code on there that you can scan, and it will take you directly to our information to file a complaint. And then there are paper complaint forms in about 70 different community buildings throughout Louisville, Metro, Jefferson County, so libraries, community centers, and other places like that. You could also call us. I don't know if we can take a fax.
Good.
Back here. I remember when the Breonna Taylor situation happened, and one of the interesting parts of that story was that there was an internal police review committee that I think one of those officers was actually on it. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, does this take the place of that, or is that still
It was a police
there?
review board.
It was a police review board with police.
And the one who was on.
One guy was actually on
So we have, if I recall, the police merit board. The police merit board reviews disciplinary, but disciplinary has to have occurred for them to get it. There was another board, the it's a latter part of our name, the accountability board, which would look at a shooting or serious injury that occurred. But they wouldn't look at it until after the investigation was done, and then that board then could make recommendations to the police. That board was dissolved. The police review and accountability that I am on took that board's place. And according to those rules, the predecessor of us would not have been allowed to make any recommendations because it didn't get that far. And the police merit board wouldn't have gotten it because there wasn't any disciplinary. It didn't get that far. So not until I believe there was interim chief Yvette Gentry, then action was taken. Then if you recall, that did go to the police merit board because officers were terminated. That was part of that disciplinary action. That was what you saw at the police merit board where they were trying to get their jobs back. And then the board ruled, if I recall, that none of them were rehired. Does that make sense? Okay.
The name of our conversation tonight is Beyond a Few Bad Apples, and I wonder if you could speak to, and we know we want to talk about the systemic challenges within the LMPD and to change the culture. At the same time, can you change that culture if there are people in place who really should not be police officers? And does your office have the ability to go back retroactively and deal with some of the officers who set the folks out, for example, to kill Breonna Taylor, where she was killed?
Oh, sure you want me to take that.
I think that there may be some aspects of that incident that we could investigate, but I don't think it would be on an individual officer level. It would be more along the lines of, was the professional standards unit investigation adequate, or was the professional integrity unit's investigation adequate? Because we can't be in a position of double jeopardy where an officer has been investigated and found to have been within policy, and then we can't come back and substitute that. But we have no statute of limitations as far as complaints go. So we have gotten older complaints. We have, I think we have some investigations for incidents that occurred in 2019 and 2020. Some of them that were actually investigated by the PSU, but we found aspects that needed to be examined. So the board has authorized that to take place. But we will attempt to do the systemic changes and the individual changes and operate on a parallel path. The Inspector General, most likely the individual aspects of the officer's behavior, and the board doing more of the systemic examination in conjunction with our analysts.
Dr. Jason Miller from a co-host of Solutions to Violence on Forward Radio. In terms of the Civilian Review Board, what's the age range? You know, are students, how young and old?
I don't know that.
Could I suggest that you have students on board?
Yes, we can definitely make sure. We're appointed from different sources. Metro Council makes 3 appointments, I believe. Mayor Fisher can make 3 or 4. And then there are certain community groups that are listed within the ordinance that can also nominate individuals or representatives. And so I don't know, I mean, it seems quite fine that any of those groups could nominate a student to be on the board.
My question comes around the issue of what has changed in regard to the process, and then what, if any, role does either the Office of the Inspector General or the Accountability Board have in reviewing or having an ability to comment on issues such as the LMPD officers having the ability to push through falsified search warrants, or even the process of the criteria that is used in the name of getting search warrants. What led to Breonna Taylor's wrongful death was an issue of getting search warrants under false pretenses, or getting search warrants under some larger agenda that was to the detriment of entire communities or in entire groups or segments of people. Is there a role? Is there some level of input that has teeth? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for the question. We're as far as the changes in the process, we are providing a new avenue and a new outlet for the civilian population to come and complain against LMPD. In the old days, you had to go to the PSU office and file a complaint. So you essentially had to go to your abuser to file a complaint against your abuser. So we're removing that stigma, and you can come to us and file the complaint. It doesn't mean that we will be able to investigate it, but it does mean that we will be able to monitor it, and if you so choose, go to PSU with you, help you file a complaint, and then have it come back to us. And those are some of the things that we're still negotiating. And in my discussions with the Department of Justice, I would like to see a very clean line of distinction. So if it's from outside of the department, it comes to us and we triage it and we handle it in accordance with our protocols and policies. If it's within the department, then of course the department would handle it themselves. As it relates to the examples that you cited, I think it's clear that if we were in place, we may have been able to observe that there was a rogue unit within the department, the 9th Mobile Unit. It's had other names throughout. Because we have looked at deficiencies or sufficiencies, should I say, of whether or not there was probable cause to have the warrant signed by a judge, and was there enough there for a probable cause finding. So we have a couple of those in front of us now, probably not coincidentally from 2020. So we hope that we would be able to discover those things as the Department of Justice was able to do that, with observing patterns, observing certain names popping up all of the time. This is supposed to be something that is triggered by the early intervention system that was recommended in the Hillard-Hines report. And is supposed to be a management tool for LMPD supervisors to notice when an officer is troubled.
That's a great element, the power of discovery.
Yes.
Having the authority and the power of discovery.
we have yet to test our recommendations at this point. So one of the other aspects that we believe the Department of Justice will convey is that the department will have a responsibility to respond to our recommendations so that they just don't go into the ether and disappear.
And I'll just add, the board is subject to open meetings, open records. And so the things that we discuss, we're not going in a closed session to talk about things. If you pull up the minutes, you can see exactly what we talk about. So you can come to our meetings. We usually have visitors at our meetings, and we also have a public comment period at our meetings if anybody wanted to speak. So just that amount of transparency, right? Like we're not hiding what we're talking about. All of the members are, you know what I mean? So if we're discussing possible recommendations, that's open for everyone to see. During appropriate times, the public can comment on that and address us as we are talking about certain topics. And so just the level of transparency where things aren't hidden, things aren't in the dark. I mean, I think the public found out that we were having issues getting information from police because we discussed it at our meetings because we weren't able to proceed with investigations. So just the level of transparency and the light on our relationship as we move forward, I think in and of itself is a change to the process that we did not have before.
And I'll just add quickly, and we also have a responsibility to establish trust within the community as well. So we have to be able to provide that safe place for that information to come to us, and we will strive every day to do that.
Question.
I have two questions. One, to circle back again to the subpoena power. Is that not available because the state says it's not? And then the other thing is, what kinds of data are you planning to track? There's a whole gamut, but what kinds are really important to you all?
I'll answer the subpoena power question really quickly. That does have to come from the state, and it can come in different forms. It can come directly to the board for us to be able to issue subpoenas. It can come from us through Metro Council, who has authority to issue subpoenas. There's about 3 or 4 different ways that it can happen, and I'll tell you as the board chair, I don't really care which way that it occurs. If there's wanting more checks or balances on what we're doing and trying to assure that the board's not running out subpoenaing people and documents, that's perfectly fine. I don't see us running around trying to do that. But there will be instances, I believe, when we would need it. And so we'll continue with each session to try to get the subpoena power, working with Metro Council and the administration. All right.
So I can't think of any sort of data that we wouldn't look at. Our analyst has done he's presented 2 studies already. He's determined a peer department for us to compare ourselves to based upon a myriad of matrix. And he determined that Charlotte Mecklenburg would be a good peer department for us to compare ourselves to. He did a patrol study that was published a couple of months ago. And at any given time, you have 11 police officers on shift to respond to your call in any district. That's the staffing level currently. And next Wednesday, he's going to present a study to the board regarding calls for service and complaints. And so we're also in the process of undertaking a caseload study regarding the Detective Bureau for the department because we've come across some astounding numbers. And so we're working across all 8 divisions to determine what's going on with detective caseloads and where the problems might lie with those.
One of the things that concerns me is that some populations have given up on a lot of stuff. And so there might be a reason to have a whole lot more complaints than are actually issued. And I was just wondering, does the data person have a way to say we've gotten 3 complaints at this area? It probably represents 50. You know what I'm...
I hear what you're saying. I don't know that we could make that direct causational correlation, if that's the right word. I don't know. I'm not the data person, so we hired somebody, right? But the DOJ report does cite that there's a very low number of complaints for a department of this size. And you can understand why there will be a suppressed complaint traffic based upon the hurdles that were presented to the public in order to file a complaint. And one of the misnomers is that there can't be discipline if it's not a sworn affidavit to begin the complaint. And it's just not true. You can act on a non-sworn complaint if you can develop that information without the complaint. So if you can verify the information in some other way and you can develop the evidence, that can go forward. And so all of those things will lead to eventually a spike in complaints because we'll be more visible in the community and we'll have a lot more complaints. And then we'll really track what our sustained rate is as opposed to the complaint traffic.
So one of the alarming aspects of the DOJ report in my reading was the evidence put forth of just not taking records internally of actions and connections with the public that may or may not have been problematic, but basically not doing the job internally of keeping records. So how can an organization like yours function if the records aren't there? And there were, I believe, estimates about based on the number of contacts in certain situations, and that they knew it happened, and the lack of records of the nature of them. So I'm confused about how accountability occurs, and that was in spite of numerous orders from different bodies within and without to do this differently. So can you address that vacuum, I guess? And how it will change, how it can change.
I mean, I think that it would definitely have to be one of the things that are addressed in the final consent decree. And as Ed pointed out, that would then have a monitor and measurements. And though it was not tracked before, and I can say for some of our complaints, like that's an issue, right? I came to the police and I tried to do this, or I talked to such and such, or now there's not, I mean, it's definitely a complaint that is heard over and over, right? Is to start that level of accountability and transparency. And I hate to say it, but we have a responsibility too, and in some of our complaints is what you've seen is I went to headquarters at 3 o'clock on May 15th and I spoke to Officer Johnson and they have their own records. We have to sometimes be just as proactive and create our own records as well. That helps, right? Particularly as we're beginning to establish that level of transparency and accountability, right? If they don't have it, but you have it, right? Then there's something that we can then begin to build on. But that's a culture change, right? It's just part of the system and part of the practice is that citizens come up and talk to us and we blow them off. Well, now we have to change that. And if they know that they're going to be held accountable for a change in their practice, because there's no policy that says blow citizens off and don't respond, right? It's the exact opposite. But the practice is, I'm going to make you come back 3 or 4 times before I actually take you seriously. And so if we're going to have to change that practice, they have to know that they're going to be held accountable by us, by you, and also, if it's in the consent decree, and monitored by the monitor and the federal government. I don't have any other answers at this moment except to try to change that practice and hold them accountable for not doing those records, right? If you talk to them and they don't have it later, it's also partly on us sometimes to help them change themselves, right?
I'll just add a couple of things. Some of it we will have to start anew because the information won't be there. I think that there will be some other mandates about our ability to go into PSU files as the IG without LMPD providing it to us. They're all in a database. It's called IA Pro. And right now we have our own silos in IA Pro. But lastly, what I'll say is that the officers on LMPD are not going to change their behavior simply because the DOJ is in town. So those officers that are abusers and that are breaking policy as a part of their work, they're going to continue to do that. And at some point it will catch up to them. And they will come under our scrutiny. So, maybe 1 out of 99 might decide, well, maybe I better get my act together now the DOJ's in town. But the rest of them will continue to police the way that they believe is proper, even though it's not.
That's part of the reason we're here, is to be support and advocacy for the positions that you're espousing. I want to point out to everyone, on your seats there were a couple of papers. I hope you'll look at those, and there are URL codes on there. Also, as you leave, there are a couple of papers here that Ed brought that can link you right to the Office of the Inspector General. Question back here.
So you were saying earlier that you were hoping that the DOJ would make some requirements about accountability and some follow-up to what's going on with the complaints. What are some things that we can do? You're out there supporting the community with your work. What can we do to support your work and ensure that that is exactly what happened?
That's the money question.
That is the money question. Thank you. One of our enemies is going to be an apathetic public, and we can't afford that. So, yes, you are. Thank you very much. So, I would encourage you to attend the Civilian Review and Accountability Board meetings. Monitor the notes if you can't attend the meeting. Also, we're going to be holding a series of meetings over the next 4 months. There are Community Policing Council meetings, and those are going to be our conduit to the community having direct input into policy and monitoring how LMPD conducts itself in conjunction with the Civilian Review and Accountability Board and the Office of Inspector General. It's a program that I'm stealing from Albuquerque. It started in a grassroots, 2 people in a computer room, and is now codified in ordinance as a policy review component of all Albuquerque Police Department policies. So any policy that changes, it has to go to the community policing councils for their sign-off and comment. So I hope that we will evolve into that as well.
I would just say that if there is any opportunity for the public to comment, to aggressively comment. The DOJ has been here, they were last week and this week. Go to the meetings. Go to the one-on-one meeting. fill out the forms that they have and make sure that we send those out. Distribute those forms to people that can't come to the meeting. There was also a Zoom call earlier this afternoon for the interim police chief. We're in transition. They're in leadership transition, as well as trying to negotiate this consent decree. And if they're going to open it up, we need to participate. We as community, not just you all, it's wonderful that we're all here, but take advantage of every opportunity that they say that they are open for comment and get others to comment as well. All those things collectively make a difference. In addition to everything that Ed said, please come to our meetings. Please sign up for our public comment period. Please reach out to us on the website. And we're here for you all. We're your liaison with police. And so now that we, like I said, I feel better. I didn't want to be out here in the community and try honestly saying, hey, come talk to us, and we couldn't get anywhere with your complaint. That felt very disingenuous. But now that we are making way, I do believe that, and there'll be opportunities from the board. We will be more out in community now because we feel as though we can actually investigate your complaint if you file it now. So please reach out to us and encourage others. That's what I would say.
I'm sorry, I want to add two things. I would encourage you also to come to us if you have any policy changes or recommendations. The board has made 2 policy recommendations. One was adopted prior to it getting to the department, and that was a recommendation on dealing with the transgender population. And the one that has yet to be enacted is an anti-retaliation policy for filing a civilian complaint. There is no policy against retaliation for those that file a complaint. So that's been with the city now for about 50 days. And reach out to your local representative and just espouse your support for our organizations. Thank you.
Metro Council?
My question has to do with accountability. So it seems what I'm hearing is that if somebody files a complaint, you'll take the complaint, you'll investigate it. Let's suppose you say there's merit to the complaint, collect data and say there's a lot of this happens a lot of times. You make a recommendation, I assume that goes to LMPD and maybe the mayor's office. Who then holds them accountable to do something about it?
That is left to the purview of the chief of police. The chief of police has
So
the
there's
final
nothing
say.
in the Justice Department or anything that will, even though it's a proven problem.
Correct. The chief of police is always going to have the final say for any police department across the nation as the final arbiter for discipline. Now, different jurisdictions have different systems. I was in Wisconsin where when I was a volunteer police commissioner, we were the appellate body for the chief's discipline, like the merit board here. But ultimately, the chief is in charge of the department, and the chief will have the final say on discipline.
That's also true of policy then.
Yes.
Question. I'm walking up there. This may sound like a cynical question, but you mentioned Albuquerque is like 93% complete. How do you think the black population of Albuquerque would evaluate the effectiveness of that? Do they see 93% success?
I would say so. There's not a large black population in Albuquerque. It's about 3%. It's more Native, Hispanic, Native American. I think, well, I can tell you that when I left, the general word was that Albuquerque police had improved, and that was feedback from the public. And we know it was about Albuquerque because they really did not like the Bernalillo County sheriffs, who would sometimes patrol the same areas. So they were having those interactions and they were reporting much more positively about the Albuquerque Police Department.
I was wondering what the feeling at the police department was since the Justice Department came out.
How did they feel and how are they feeling about the findings?
Yes.
I think the FOP had a response, official response.
Negative.
Right, very negative.
Well, one of the reasons that I was appointed is that I'm always honest and forthright with what I see and what is going on. One of the things that I find astounding at this point is that while the department is scrutinizing the report to the point where they're arguing about whether or not B should be capitalized for black people and W not capitalized for white people. They're doing that level of scrutiny on the report. Yet, there's no ownership of the transgressions. There's no contrition from my meetings with the command staff. And they're under the illusion or the delusion that this consent decree is not going to affect their work. And it is. It's going to be very intrusive. They don't understand what changes are coming.
That's heartbreaking.
I got a bunch of questions.
Wow, questions.
I just have a follow-up question to that, but it's like, what's the impact of all these investigations been on the morale of the police department? Have there been more resignations, more retirements, harder to get new recruits? Is the recruiting process become much more demanding to learn all these new things that they have to do?
I can't comment on retention or morale, I think that if I was working for a police department that allowed people to call on the radio that somebody's thirsty and throw slushies on them, that I wouldn't want to be associated with a department like that. So you can look at the morale issue from many sides. All civil servants, city workers, all cities are having trouble hiring people. Police officers fit into that realm. But I think that there will be an examination of how LMPD recruits and what the standards are for their hiring. I would not support anything that lessens the criteria that they have now, because we need to have a professional police force. And that's all we're expecting. That's all we're asking them to do is to police like a professional.
I will say that, I wouldn't have done a ride-along if I wasn't required to do that on this board. And having done that in various districts at different times of day, weekends, weekdays, night, early in the morning, their shortage of officers is quite evident and definitely changes the way they're able to patrol and how they respond. As he mentioned, that'll come out 11 officers in a district on a shift for, the 4th division, which I believe that is downtown, upper end of Broadway, all the way down to Shawnee Park. 11. So you have to think about how you respond and how they're able to be responsive, right, to calls for service when there's that few officers on a shift for that area. Does that make sense? And so I wouldn't, I don't know what, it could be a whole list of things that affect recruitment, not to mention anything else. I mean, if you're looking for a job and you Google someplace and all this negative stuff comes up, that's not going to be the first place you go, right? So I try to be a little bit more hopeful in that no, having the DOJ and a consent decree is not that positive, but if you want to be a part of a culture changeable organization, this is your moment, right? If you want to make it better, you want to serve your community in this way, and this is what your calling is, this is your moment.
Yep.
And this is your moment to make a difference and serve the community and help the community. Because we all want to feel safe and protected. And that is safe and protected from police too. So, yes, do we need them? Yes. Because if I am getting robbed or my car is broken into, who else am I going to call? So, it was an eye-opening experience to do those ride-alongs and be in their shoes on a 12-hour shift in the district and see how they have to make those decisions around all the calls that are coming in. And I'm glad that I actually had the opportunity to do it.
I'll just add that we place a tremendous burden on our police officers, too much of a burden. And part of the rethinking of policing is that we have to reorient what we send police officers to, because there are other professionals and other people that can provide services for some of the calls that we send them to.
So you asked for recommendations, and I just wanted to pop this thing. I don't know, it could be a really ridiculous idea, but I thought maybe one just pop it in and see what happens. So you're facing lack of trust internally, lack of trust externally, and not a whole lot of accountability is happening. And so to connect all these things, what if we disregard humanity and use technology? Just like how we use, help desk issues, like we have problems with our, computer's not working, or the phone is not working, what do? We create a ticket. And the ticket goes to certain specific individuals. They look at it to see if it has any validity or not. Then from there, then direct it to the right people and assign it to them. And it doesn't close until the person that issued the complaint with the ticket will say that the complaint has been addressed, so the ticket has been addressed, just like how we did it, we use it, we say, yeah, it's fixed, and then the ticket is closed. Why don't we approach it from that perspective? That's the recommendation.
Make everybody color.
Thank you. Some of that we do incorporate because we do an initial review. And that initial review is what we do before we even take it to the board to determine whether or not. I think we probably can do a better job of closing the loop as you're suggesting, so that the complainant knows what happens on the backside as well. So thank you.
I have a real quick question before we get away from this, shortage of officers, and they're covering a lot of things, and I agree that they absolutely need to divvy up some of the things that they're not that great at to people that are really great at it. But they also have the largest proportion of our city budget so we're short, and yet we're giving more and more money to that budget. I don't understand, why do we need it if we don't have any officers? Can you speak to some of that?
No. I can't. And I'm sure that a large portion of everybody, is, your personnel and associated benefits. But, I don't know. But it's budget time, and I'm sure their budget is on the website. And if the interim police chief has not had her budget hearing yet, I'm sure it's coming up.
and it will break down their costs, their personnel, their equipment, all of those things will be there, and we can get a good look at what that's supposed to be going to.
I don't think it's going to change until it's demonstrated that other avenues work. So there are some mental health teams now responding to mental health calls, so there will be needed a demonstrated track history of that working, and then they'll be allocated more funds and expansion. The same thing for sending non-armed traffic investigators to vehicle crashes, and some of the other aspects of policing where you don't need to send an armed individual to a call.
One of the deputy mayors told me that they have the money to hire more police. It's in the budget, it's there. The recruiting is the problem. And they are at least 400 officers short of what they should have for a city this size. The police out Westport Road, what district it is, but a policeman from there said their district is twice as large as it was for the number of police that are assigned there. So he said, we're trying to cover twice the territory. On another matter, I talked to 5 policemen, and they all say, we want change, we want better training. We desperately need better training. But he said, the whole system's got to change to do that.
They're going to get better training. That's going to happen. And one aspect that I think should be examined is that if you're here eligible to work with a green card, whether you're a citizen or not, you should be allowed to be a police officer. So look at all of the communities that are policed here. And so if you have a shortage, a police shortage, and it doesn't mean that those people are less qualified, they're probably more qualified and better educated than some of the recruits that we have now. So there needs to be an examination on a more broad aspect of who we're recruiting to be police officers.
I mean, I think, as we experienced only a small portion of their training, they expressed that to the board as well, that we need more training. I used to be a trainer a little bit, other little positions, and so the theory behind training that I was always exposed to was you train, not just to train and have somebody sign off, but you train people to establish expectations, number one, and to change behavior. And if you're training, however you're doing it, whether you're reading a policy to sign off or whatever it is, if it's not setting expectations and changing behavior with the follow-up that comes after to ensure that you have changed behavior, then you're wasting your time because you're not going to get anything from that. And that's not just in policing, but that's in any job that you have, right?
I'd like to make a comment about that because with the training, it's always been,
with the training, it's always been, they don't want to bring anybody in from the outside that's going to challenge the culture that they've established. So I think even to your point about who should we recruit as officers, we also need to think about who's doing the training. Because if you have somebody who's a very seasoned officer and their goal is to even, let's say there's been pressure, bring somebody in, get some new ideas in here. What will happen is if you're not strong in your own self, they'll get co-opted by the more seasoned officer, and all the new ideas will still be run through that same mindset that they have. And I know this, well, I'll tell you later how I know this. I'm just saying, when you're making your recommendations and doing your thing, just make sure that the people that are in charge of establishing that training academy, that they're the right people.
think I heard you're a forensic psychologist?
Yeah.
That might be how you know what it is. So to respond to that, or we're going to let Kathy have the last question for the evening.
No pressure.
Make it a good one, Kathy.
You spoke earlier about the consent decree process, the question, everything getting recommendations come in and then negotiations. Two parts to that is, what is the normal time frame on something like that? And is that in any way going to be hampered by the fact that there is an interim chief and where that process is?
I've heard it could take a year to negotiate the consent decree. I know that the Department of Justice probably has most of theirs already drafted, and they'll await the last bit of input from the community before they put the final touches on it. I know that Louisville Metro Government has their own version that's been drafted, and so I don't think it'll take a year. I think maybe 4 to 6 months to negotiate it, and how that will be affected by the interim chief is an interesting position. I don't believe that she's on the negotiation team. I think one of the deputy chiefs is her designee. So it's hard to say, but I don't know, 6 months, and then it'll come out, and then we'll go around and we'll discuss all the paragraphs and how it's going to measure up and who the monitor is going to be. And so, we've got some conversations to be having for sure.
Kellie Watson and Harness, thank you so much for your
I'm so glad that you all are continuing to do these. One of my old role right before I left the Fisher administration was I was an equity officer, so we started leading the Louisville, and so it's so exciting to see that it's still going and that everyone is still participating and engaging in all the opportunities. So
Absolutely. I want to say again, on your chairs there were 2 pieces of paper. One of them will connect you to Listen, Learn, Act. The next thing we have coming up is our next anti-racism challenge that comes up in July. We have environmental tour happening in June, I believe. That's on there as well as our ongoing Listen, Learn, Act work. If you're not part of us, you are now. Just join this ongoing moving train and help us continue this work. Ruth Ann and I had a conversation right before this gathering about whether we had hope anymore. These folks give me a lot of hope. You all being here tonight gives me a lot of hope. Because in 2020, we had no idea where we were going. Friedrich Nietzsche said, what we need is a long obedience in the same direction. We need people who will stick with it and be dogs that will continue to fight and work at this love action that we're trying to do in such a way that we make our city a better place. So thank you for being here tonight, and continue to be with us in the days ahead. Thank you all so much, and have a great evening.